The old man used to say all sorts of things every day, so it was great when he passed away. Right. The old lady is still alive and kicking though. I was shocked by the loud phone conversations Sarah was having. She used to be such a good kid when she was little. How did it come to this? Grandpa, just things like, hurry up and disappear. Or are you still alive? He was a nuisance, right? Imagining the pain my husband went through made it hard to breathe. Something inside me was fading away for good. This is... Sarah froze with a smile when she saw me and Linda. As she stammered, trying to make excuses, I cut her off. Can you not talk? If you're here to volunteer for a conversation, that's fine. But I really don't want to talk to you. The person in front of me was no longer my daughter. My love had vanished, leaving only the guilt of having raised such a person. With firm resolve, I took a new step forward. My name is Patricia Johnson. I am a 54-year-old housewife. Until recently, I lived happily with my husband, Robert, who was 2 years older than me. Dad, I mean Robert, rest in peace. You're not in pain anymore. It's sad, but goodbye. The day my beloved husband passed away, I was too stunned to even cry. Instead, during the funeral, I cried until there were no more tears left. Relatives, friends, and many others took turns comforting me. Of course, my family also quietly supported me. The family I had left was my only daughter, Sarah, and her husband. Sarah is now 29, although there were some rough patches during her teenage years. She has settled down now. She has become a bright, cheerful, and reliable adult woman. She no longer lives with us. She is married to a man named Will and lives in an apartment in the suburbs. Will, who is younger than Sarah, is very responsible and kind. He helped a lot with the funeral arrangements, which was a great relief. A kind husband, a cheerful daughter, and a kind son-in-law. I never imagined the family I thought I had would fall apart like this. No, I had probably just been oblivious, and everything had been falling apart long before. Thinking back to the first signs, I feel like it goes back 15 years. At that time, Sarah was in middle school, right in the rebellious phase of adolescence. She's been going out a lot lately. I leaned in at my husband's grumble. I had been thinking the same thing, so I considered it a great opportunity to talk to him about it. Sarah was late coming home again today. She had been coming home late for days, not just after school, but even after it got dark. Yes, she seems to be influenced by her seniors in the club. She even dyed her hair without permission. I just don't know what to do. Sarah had been a very good, bright, and adorable daughter when she was little. She had a bit of a sassy side, but I raised her with love. I think she was just an ordinary child until elementary school. But when she entered middle school, she changed. She started hanging out with friends who wore their uniforms sloppily, and she herself became delinquent. Just the other day, I found a band-aid on her earlobe, and to my surprise, she had gotten her ears pierced. You're not hanging out with some weird people, are you? It's dangerous. You know, what if something happens? Shut up, old lady. Conversations like this happened often. My husband, hearing my concerns, looked very worried too. As time passed and Sarah entered high school, she began staying out overnight without permission. Where have you been? I was worried. At least call us. I couldn't help but raise my voice. It wasn't anger, but anxiety that made it impossible to stay silent. But Sarah acted like she didn't care. What annoying. She would say that and disappear into her room. Gradually, the stress began to take a toll on me. My husband tried to talk to Sarah too, but she wouldn't listen to him either. In fact, the more he pushed, the more she stayed out. My 20-year friend Linda invited me out for tea to ease my worries. I felt truly relieved spending time with my friend after so long. Maybe I didn't raise her right, I muttered, and Linda sighed. Linda, a mother of 2 boys, didn't fully grasp the difficulties unique to raising a daughter. But as someone who had her kids earlier, she listened supportively. Sarah isn't a little kid anymore. It's not just about how you and Robert raised her. Remember when we were in high school, friends and TV had a bigger influence on us than our parents. Her words lightened my heart a little. Linda was right. I never turned rebellious, but I valued my friends' words over my parents when I was in high school. So it wasn't hard to understand why Sarah found our concerns annoying. When I got home, my husband also encouraged me. Let's keep showing her love together. She'll understand when she grows up. With renewed strength from my friend and husband's words, I decided to continue believing in my daughter and carry on as usual. Sarah remained distant, often staying out. Her makeup became more extravagant and her nails glittered with polish. She seemed to have a boyfriend, but she didn't introduce him. Probably not a decent guy. In early May, Sarah came home early, which was rare. By then, I had gotten used to her late returns and was surprised by her early arrival. "Oh, you're early. Welcome home. Are you having dinner here tonight?" When I spoke to her, she didn't retreat to her room as usual, but stood there fidgeting. I wondered what was going on. Then she handed me something she had been hiding behind her back. "Here, for Mother's Day." I couldn't believe my eyes. Sarah handed me a single, bright red carnation. I never expected to receive a Mother's Day gift from her. I was so happy I teared up. "Oh, thank you." Sarah smiled slightly and went to her room. I excitedly placed the flower in a vase and proudly showed it to my husband when he got home. "Look, Sarah gave me this." Seeing the bright red flower, my husband smiled. I couldn't help but hope that our relationship with our daughter would slowly improve. But that night, when I got up to use the bathroom, I noticed a light on in Sarah's room. It was already 2 a.m. Hoping she would go to bed soon, I listened and heard cheerful chatter. Apparently, she was on the phone with a friend. I couldn't help but eavesdrop. Just use your parents until they drop dead. Yeah, even talking to them is a volunteer act. I was horrified by the terrible things I was hearing. Unaware that I was listening, Sarah continued proudly. "You can fool them with just a little niceness. At my place, I gave my mum an 88-cent flower for Mother's Day and she cried." The image of the red carnation from the afternoon flashed in my mind. I bit my lip and quietly walked away. The next morning, I got up a little earlier than usual and immediately woke my husband. I needed to talk about the phone conversation I overheard. My husband was stunned at first, but then he scratched his head and pondered. Is she serious, or is she just pretending to be tough for her friends? Remembering Sarah's shy expression when she gave me the carnation made me want to believe the latter. Before long, Sarah woke up, looking sleepy. Seeing me and my husband staring at her, she tilted her head in confusion. "What's up? Good morning." Seeing her like this, my husband and I both relaxed. We decided to trust in Sarah's sincerity and smiled wryly. 10 years later, in our mid-50s, my beloved husband fell ill. Despite being newly married, Sarah actively helped with his care. I was happy, thinking my husband's words had come true. She understood as an adult. However, my husband didn't seem pleased with Sarah's visits. Worried, I consulted Sarah. "Dad seems to think he's bothering me." I understood and believed her as she lowered her gaze. I scolded my husband. "It's okay to rely on her. She owes us for all the trouble she's caused. Let her be filial now." When I smiled, my husband looked sad and unconvinced. After a year of battling illness, my beloved husband passed away. at just 56. I was overcome with grief. After the funeral, Sarah took my hand. "Why don't you move in with us? It's lonely by yourself. We're family, so let's support each other." I happily accepted the invitation to move in with them. Since Sarah and Will's apartment is small, we decided to live in the house my husband and I had. First, we started by cleaning out the house. Each item was filled with memories, making it hard to declutter. Sarah and Will often helped. Seeing them reminisce and say, "This is so nostalgic, and we can use this," was heartwarming. It really felt like we were a family. As life slowly returned to normal, I went to my part-time job. Sarah had come over in the morning, so I left her to watch the house. After work, I stepped outside to find it pouring rain. A co-worker checking the weather app said it was a sudden shower. I didn't have an umbrella, and it was a walk to the station, so I decided to wait it out. "Sorry, I'll be late because I'm waiting for the rain to stop." I called Sarah, who was supposed to be at home. She cheerfully replied, "Okay, I'll make dinner and wait for you. Will is coming over tonight, so how about a family barbecue at home?" I appreciated her taking care of the house. Although my husband had passed away, I felt lucky to have my daughter and her husband as my new family. As I waited for the rain to stop at the entrance of my workplace, a familiar car pulled up. "Patricia, I was just on my way to your place. Perfect timing. Hop in." It was Linda in the driver's seat. She had happened to pass by and offered me a ride. "I'll get home much earlier than expected. Thanks, Linda." We talked about our lives on the way. I told her about living with my daughter and her husband and our plans to move in together, and she was genuinely happy for me. Things were fine until we got home. It was summer. The windows were open, with just screens to keep out bugs. As we got out of the car, we heard Sarah's loud phone conversation. Gramps used to say all sorts of things every day, so it was great when he was taken care of quickly. "Granny is really stubborn." I gasped. I stopped in my tracks and grabbed Linda's arm. She also looked tense and listened quietly. We moved closer to the window. "Oh, Gramps, just things like, 'Hurry up and disappear,' or 'Are you still alive?' He was a nuisance, right?" I was horrified. I realized that these cruel words were aimed at my husband. Is this why my husband didn't want Sarah's help? I hated myself for not realizing it sooner. Yeah, my mom's family home is in the middle of nowhere, but it's huge. We totally want it, right? So, let's be patient. Once we get the inheritance, we'll get rid of her. Hey, Will, do you know how to get a living inheritance? I felt the blood drain from my face. Sarah and Will weren't the loving family I thought they were. Knowing everything now, I instantly decided to cut ties with them. The affection I had felt moments ago seemed like a lie. I never knew love could vanish so completely. So, that's what you thought all along. The phrase, shaking with anger, isn't an exaggeration. I muttered softly and then opened the screen door from the outside. Sarah's smile froze when she saw me and my friend. "Oh no, this is?" Sarah nearly dropped her phone as she began making excuses. I watched her coldly. Just minutes ago, I thought she was a kind and thoughtful daughter. I had been completely wrong, thinking she had changed for the better after her rebellious phase. I couldn't forgive myself for being so blind, even feeling proud of her growth. If I had realized earlier, my husband wouldn't have suffered so much. I felt a mix of sadness and anger that was unbearable. I interrupted Sarah's excuses. "Can you not talk? If you're here to volunteer for a conversation, that's fine, but I really don't want to talk to you." Using polite language reflected the emotional distance I felt. I signaled Linda, and we marched into the house. Inside, I saw bags and tools that Sarah and Will had brought in. I grabbed everything and started throwing it out the window. "What the hell are you doing?" Sarah protested and tried to grab me, but I resisted with all my strength. Linda, who was stronger, was pushing Sarah out the front door while I finished throwing everything out. Sarah was yelling and struggling with Linda. Our eyes met, and I couldn't help but voice my resentment. Even when you became a delinquent, when you mouthed off, when you loudly complained about us to your friends, I still believed in the child I gave birth to, but it was all for nothing. If I had cut ties earlier, my husband wouldn't have been hurt. I realized my cheeks were wet when I wiped them. Apparently, I had been crying. It was just a joke. Sarah, half smiling, made me feel a surge of intense disgust. I pushed her away with all my strength when she tried to touch my shoulder. "Don't touch me," I shouted, causing Sarah to drop her phone. The screen still showed Will's name, indicating the call was ongoing. I picked up the phone and threw it with all my might. The phone flew out the window and landed on the road in front of the house. "No, my phone!" Sarah screamed and ran to retrieve it. Taking advantage of the moment, I shut all the windows, locked them, and secured the front door with the chain. "Wait, doesn't Sarah have a spare key? And that rough husband of hers, he might come here." Linda's words startled me. Will looked like a former thug, and we, two women in our 50s, wouldn't stand a chance against him. On Linda's suggestion, I called for help. Neighbors and Linda's sons came over to stay with us. Of course, I decided not to move in with Sarah and Will. Not only that, but I also decided to sell the house and move far away. I want to go somewhere they can't find me. I never want to see them again. I want to move to a place where we won't run into each other by accident. So, instead of calling a moving company, I called friends and a buyout service. The buyout service couldn't come immediately, so I asked nearby friends and relatives for help. "As a keepsake, please take anything you want, anything except the ashes or memorial tablets." Only a few people could come that day, but when I said it was first come, first served, a few hurried over. I also told my neighbors, "Take anything you like, TV, fridge, anything. I'm starting fresh with all new stuff." I packed valuables in a travel bag. Neighbors happily took bookshelves and a still new vacuum cleaner. By evening, relatives and friends arrived. They picked out nice pots or my husband's golf clubs, asking, "Is this really okay?" with delighted faces. I was glad to give things to people who appreciated them, rather than have Sarah and Will take them. As people packed up keepsakes, a car with a loud engine pulled up outside. As expected, Sarah and Will had come back. They probably intended to ask for forgiveness. I saw through the window that Sarah was holding a cake box, likely as an apology gift. Thinking they could make up for their wrongs with a cake was ridiculous. The two of them seemed confused by the cars and the number of people going in and out of the house. I stood up and headed for the front door to drive them away. "What's this? What's going on? No, that's the bag I wanted." Seeing appliances and a designer bag that used to be mine being taken out, Sarah turned pale. Will stood there, stunned, at the entrance. "Hey, thieves." Sarah tried to grab a friend who was leaving with the TV, but others stopped her. Everyone here knew about Sarah and Will's misdeeds from me and Linda. No one was going to listen to them now. Sarah kept shouting, calling them thieves. But to me, it was Sarah and Will who had stolen our time and love. "Get out, don't touch anything. Everything here belongs to me and Robert's loved ones. There's nothing for heartless people like you," I shouted with all my strength. Even after hearing my words, Sarah and Will didn't leave. Instead, they tried to come inside, so I resorted to my last measure. I called out to the people waiting in the living room. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Sarah's face twisted in fear when she saw them. Will's eyes widened in shock. It was because these were Will's parents. As their daughters-in-laws, we knew each other. I had found their contact info on a New Year's card and explained the situation over the phone. They came right away. I wanted to apologize for raising such a daughter, but the Millers empathized with me instead. It turned out they had shed many tears over their son's delinquency as well. Mr. Miller walked up to Will with a furious look and grabbed his arm. "It hurts. Stop." Will was dragged out by his father. Apparently, Will's father, who works in construction, is quite strong, and Will couldn't resist. Without a word, Will's father walked away, his imposing figure silencing Will's protests. Sarah was also thrown out by several people. My relatives, led by my husband's kin, managed to drive her away with words. "Get out quickly. You've already taken the inheritance money from Dad, my husband. Consider that your severance pay. Don't come back. Even if you do, you won't be let in. You're a stranger now." Got it? After closing the door, I collapsed to the floor. No matter how much I despised her, she was still my daughter. The regret of raising a child I had to disown brought tears to my eyes. Linda, who had come closer without me noticing, gently patted my back. After that, Sarah and Will never came to the house again. Will's parents were keeping a close watch on them. Not only Will, but also my daughter, Sarah, was being monitored as their daughter-in-law, which made me feel very apologetic. I sold everything left in the house to a buyout service and handed over the sale of the house to a realtor. Excluding my husband's memorial tablets, my belongings fit into just 2 travel bags. How light I felt. The now empty, familiar house looked strange. I felt oddly refreshed. I decided to temporarily stay at my parents' house and look for a new place. On the way to my new home, my phone rang. It was Sarah. I didn't feel like talking, but answered for a moment, only to hear her sobbing. "I'm not falling for your tears." I hung up after saying that. Instead of feeling the usual pain from my child's crying, I felt only disgust. I never imagined I'd feel this way about my own child. At my parents' house, they welcomed me with solemn faces. The room I once stayed in as a girl was now my new home. I cried softly alone. I cried all night and watched the sunrise without having slept. The sky outside the window was beautiful, reminding me of the sunrise on the mountain where my husband proposed. We used to enjoy hiking together. The sunrise felt like a push from my husband's spirit. To ensure Sarah couldn't find me, I moved far away without telling anyone my new address. My family was now just my parents. My daughter, her husband, and any future grandchildren were strangers to me. Though determined, I knew Sarah had other relatives she could turn to. Sarah still had my parents and my in-laws, 2 sets of grandparents. After I left the house, Sarah, now free to move as she pleased, tried to turn to my in-laws for help. However, having heard the full story from me, they were furious and turned her away. Despite being their beloved granddaughter, she had said terrible things to their son while he was fighting his illness. It was no wonder they didn't want to help her. Upon hearing this from my in-laws, my parents and I prepared ourselves. We expected Sarah would next try to come here. Linda, worried about my fiery temper, also came to support me. 2 days after receiving the call from my in-laws. While discussing our next steps, we heard the familiar sound of Will's car engine approaching. It was surprising they came so quickly, but I was grateful not to have to wait for days. I asked my mother to handle the intercom without opening the front door. Through the intercom, Sarah looked slightly gaunt. "Grandma, it's Sarah. Mum misunderstood, but we had a really bad fight. Please, can you help patch things up with her?" Her words about my misunderstanding nearly made me explode with anger. My sadness was blown away by my fury. Linda fanned me with a fan to cool me down. "Patricia, cool down. Come on, let's go." I stood at the door, breathing heavily, ready to confront Sarah. She was probably waiting for the door to open, not knowing I was inside. On my signal, Linda swiftly opened the door. "Grandma, Mom." Sarah, trying to enter with a smile, froze when she saw me. She should have expected me to be at my parents' house. What a thoughtless child. "Get out." As I yelled, Linda quickly closed and locked the door. I could hear Sarah and Will panicking outside, but I no longer cared. I shouted through the door, making sure they could hear me clearly. "I no longer have a daughter. Anyone who tells her sick father to hurry up and die is not my precious daughter. You are a stranger. Get out." There was one thing I held back from saying. I wish I had never given birth to you. No matter how much I felt it, I knew as a parent I shouldn't say it. Time passed, and eventually the sound of the engine signaled their departure. I instinctively knew I would never see them again. I've lost both my husband and my daughter. I wondered how Sarah would feel when she became a mother, when her child hit the rebellious phase, and when she grew old. Linda hugged me as I collapsed in tears. My parents also teared up, comforting me. I felt relieved that, even though I had lost my daughter and her husband, I still had people who cared about me. "Hello, it's terrible. Sarah and Will got divorced. They seemed so in love, but they turned out to be so heartless." Later, Linda called to tell me the news. She seemed surprised, but I wasn't. Two self-centered liars could never last long together. Sarah had been shunned by relatives and was now alone. She had worked at nightclubs for a while but couldn't keep a job and was now drifting from place to place. She probably wanted to escape her hometown where she was looked down on, but without money, she couldn't move. It seemed she would have a hard time for a while. Sarah used to be so pretty. Now she's a mess without makeup. She doesn't even have eyebrows and looks like a different person. I felt no pity. I only hoped she continued to struggle. I realized I had finally moved on. "Thanks for the update, but I don't care anymore. She's not my daughter. I should have realized it sooner." "Do you think she would have turned out differently if I had raised her differently?" Linda seemed to ponder my question, choosing her words carefully. "I'm sorry, I don't know. That's something only Robert could answer. When you see him again someday, you should ask him. He truly loved you, Patricia, no matter how long you live. I'm sure he'll be there to greet you." Her words, full of understanding, touched me deeply. I accepted them and thanked her. Since the encounter at my parents' house, Sarah hadn't contacted me directly. I had blocked her number, and she hadn't visited either my parents or my in-laws. I'm sure we will never have any contact again. Perhaps the only time we might is when one of us crosses the Rainbow Bridge. I heard Will also disappeared from town. His parents, furious about the recent events, had sent him to a distant construction site where he would be living and working. Rumor has it that he won't be able to return for at least 10 years. I hope he reflects on his actions and learns from them. Hey, dear, where should we live next? Somewhere with a nice view. Right. I talked to my husband's portrait. His smiling face looked back at me with those kind eyes. Though I wanted to move far away, I couldn't find the ideal place, so I stayed with my parents for over 6 months. During this time, something surprising happened. A letter from my husband arrived. It was a letter he had left with his parents, asking them to give it to me after 49 days. The chaos caused by Sarah delayed its delivery, but it finally reached me. Oh, Robert. Seeing his familiar handwriting made my heart ache. The slightly shaky lines showed that he had written it during his illness. His loving words read, "Patricia, thank you for walking with me until the end. I wasn't the best husband or father, but I was always happy because of you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your life for yourself. Don't worry about others. Leave behind what bothers you. Please live happily and brightly. I love you." I read the letter over and over, tracing the words with my fingers. Memories of our days together came flooding back. Because of his illness, Robert didn't leave much behind, but we had many memories. I want to climb the mountain we climbed together when we were newlyweds. On a whim, I started preparing for the trip. I had already quit my part-time job for the move, so I had plenty of time. Luckily, my parents were well off, so I didn't have to worry about living expenses. Now, I'm on an overseas trip with Linda, reminiscing about a trip to Switzerland I took with Robert. We reached the top of the mountain by train, and the unchanged landscape helped me start anew. We're thinking of moving somewhere with my parents, maybe Michigan. Somewhere with many expatriates like Lake area, where we can live happily. I talked about my dreams while enjoying the cool Swiss breeze. Being far from home, the air seemed different. Linda chuckled and responded, "My place is great too, cool and nice. There are many older folks, so your parents would find it comfortable." Linda lived in Colorado. It sounded peaceful and lovely. I started to look forward to deciding whether to live alone or with my parents, and where to settle down. I wanted to make my parents happy and take good care of them. I'm going to cherish my parents more, value my friends even more, and maybe start working part-time again. The sunrise scene from the mountain lodge was beautiful, filling me with hope for a bright future. Following my husband's words, I believed that happy, shining days lay ahead, and I was ready to live my life to the fullest.